I want to bring in Dr. Simmering, please. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. We are ready to resume the cross-examination of Dr. Simmering. Go ahead, Mr. Shellhorn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
I think we left off before the lunch break. I was going to ask you some questions about your testimony on direct examination related to guns. And I think you had indicated on direct examination that you were aware from Mr. Barisone telling you that there were certain posts or social media references to Lauren Canarak owning guns.
Yes.
And he told you that he was aware of that before the shooting.
Yes.
And I think you had indicated that that was part of what you relied on in rendering your opinion or forming your opinion that he was delusional at the time of the shooting.
That he believed a lot of this, and all this led into delusional thinking.
Now, you were aware from your review of the discovery that Mr. Barisone had called 911 on a number of occasions leading up to the day of the shooting?
Yes, at least 4 occasions.
Do you recall, did you listen to any of those 911 recordings?
I did.
Do you recall on the July 31st 911 call when he was asked whether any weapons were involved or mentioned and his response was no?
That's correct.
And you recall on August 1st when he called 911, he was asked if weapons were involved or mentioned and his response was no?
I believe that, as I recall, that was true.
And on August 3rd, do you recall that he called 911 and was asked if weapons were involved or mentioned? And his response was, I have not heard a word of that.
Something like that, yes. Those are standard questions, and I believe he answered in the negative.
And lastly, on August 5th, on the call, he was asked if weapons were involved or mentioned, and his response was, not so far.
That's correct. Not so far. That's correct.
Now, Doctor, I think you testified earlier today that the gun that was recovered after the shooting was Ruth Cox's gun.
Correct.
Do you recall in your report that you had said a number of times that you assumed it was Mary Haskins Gray's gun?
If I did, it was a mistake. I think it was Dr. Cox's gun.
And
I think.
If you can refer to page 9 of your report. Specifically, halfway down the page before the heading that says medical reports.
Yes.
Did you put in brackets there, I believe the gun was a pistol that belonged to Ms. Gray?
I'm sorry. Give me the reference, please.
Yes, sir. It's page 9, the last line before the heading.
Oh,
that
I
says
have
medical.
it. I think that was an error. I think that it belonged to Dr. Cox.
And on page 14, did you indicate at the bottom of the page, in the last paragraph, he had in his possession a small pink pistol, which I believe came from Mary Haskins Gray?
Again, I think that was an error. I remembered clearly it was a pink pistol, not to be sexist about it, but it looked like a, quote, woman's pistol. And it belonged to one of the women, and I must have had that mixed up when I dictated the report. I'm almost sure it came from Dr. Cox.
So we don't have to go through the exercise again. Would you agree with me on page 17 if it says, I'm not certain when he obtained the small pink pistol, which I believe was owned by Ms. Gray? That would be the same answer.
Yeah, I think it was my error. I think it was Dr. Cox.
Were you aware from your review of the discovery that there were multiple places where it was referenced as Ruth Cox's gun?
I think so.
You never asked Michael Barisone when he first obtained that gun, did you?
Well, yes. He said that he obtained it. It had been locked up in a safe, as I recall, and he obtained it shortly before he went down to confront Lauren Canarak at where she was living, and he armed himself because he was frightened for his life.
Can you
And he,
show-
as I recall, he removed it from his safe where it had been kept for safekeeping.
Can you show me or tell me where in your report you put that?
That,
Well, so your recollection is that you asked Michael Barisone when he first obtained the gun?
yes, I might be able to find it in my notes, not in the report. Or it might be in the police report, I don't remember.
Would you take my word for it that it's not in your report?
Yes, I will.
So your recollection is that at some point when you were interviewing Michael Barisone, he told you that he remembered getting the gun from the safe before he went to the house?
Yes.
And at least for purposes of your cross-examination, you agree with me that's not in your report?
I'm not going to look through it and waste the jury's time. I'll accept your representation.
Did you ask him when he first obtained the gun from Ruth Cox?
From what I recall, she had come up from North Carolina to visit, and she gave it to him for safekeeping, and he put it in his safe.
Would you agree with me that that's not in your report either?
No, that's not in the report. And as I recall, I don't know if it was a licensed weapon, and I think that for safekeeping, he put it in his safe. That's my best recollection of it.
So your recollection from reviewing the discovery and speaking to Michael Barrasso is that you knew that Ruth Cox had brought the gun with her from North Carolina, had given it to the defendant for safekeeping, he put it into his safe, he got it at some point before the shooting, before he went to the farmhouse,
That's my best understanding, yes.
and none of that is in your report.
Correct.
And you continually attributed the gun to Ms. Gray throughout the course of
Well, that was an error. It was Dr. Cox's gun.
No further questions, Judge.
What? Redirect.
Doctor, the prosecutor asked you questions on cross with regards to where you got the statement concerning sexual abuse allegations made to DCP and P, correct?
Yes.
Did you review the Safe Sport complaint filed by Lauren Canarak?
I never saw that complaint. I was aware of it through the police investigation, but I never saw the complaint.
Prosecutor asked you questions about feigning. What is feigning?
Feigning is faking.
Okay, and did you consider whether or not my client was feigning based on your interviews with him and a review of the discovery?
Well, it's always a consideration in a forensic interview, especially when the stakes are high. And feigning or malingering, which is another form of feigning, can be done for any number of reasons. It can be done in a simple civil context where somebody feigns injuries to get a reward, say an insurance settlement or something like that. Or somebody can feign facts in a case to avoid criminal responsibility. So in evaluating anybody, feigning or malingering is something which is always a consideration.
Okay, and in your consideration of that, did you find any evidence, based on everything that you did, to indicate that Michael Barisone was feigning about not remembering the event?
I hate the word any, because any is like any. I don't know, maybe he twitched his left eye and that would be seen by some people as evidence. If you're asking me did I find any significant evidence that he was faking, the answer is no.
Nothing further.
All right, you may step down, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you.
I call your next witness.
Dr. Hasson, I believe he's in the room down in the hall.
All right.
The next is going to go down.
ahead and step up to the mic.
Doctor, good afternoon. Please
Good
remain-
afternoon.
Please remain standing. Left hand, oh, you're way ahead of me. Left hand on the Bible, right hand. Please listen to my court clerk.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony you give to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the
My name is
record.
Charles Hasson, Hasson.
Thank you.
All right, you may have a seat, doctor. Please keep your voice up nice and loud. Go ahead, Mr. Belinkus, direct examination.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hasson.
Good afternoon.
Where do you currently reside?
In New Jersey, Ridgefield, New Jersey.
And what's your profession? What do you do for a living?
I'm a licensed psychologist in New Jersey and in New York State.
And how long have you been a licensed psychologist?
Over 30 years.
And what's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
A psychiatrist is an individual who has an MD degree. A psychologist has a PhD. Psychologist doesn't prescribe medication. The difference in the two is, in my opinion, the psychologist has more training in therapy and also in psychological testing. The psychiatrist more has training in the biological bases of mental illness.
Now, can you give a brief description of your educational background?
Okay. Well, I received my bachelor's and my master's degree in psychology. Subsequently, I went to Boston College. I received a PhD in educational psychology. During the time I was there, I did a internship at a hospital, New England Medical Center. It was an interdisciplinary program with 4 psychiatrists, 4 psychologists, and 4 social workers. While at Boston College, while at the Tufts program, my supervisor had just graduated from Rutgers University and did research on infant memory. And I asked her if I could contact her supervisor. I did my dissertation on 11-week-old babies.
Okay, can you give us your background with regards to any agencies that you were affiliated with regards to your use of your
Well, for a number of years, I did reports for Hudson County Superior Court, approximately 1,200 to 1,500 reports over a number of years. I was working for the Rossi Group at that time. Subsequently, I became an administrator at Hudson County Jail for 3 years. I saw patients. I had my office on the unit. They were all psychiatric patients there. During the time that I saw the patients and treated them, I also did further reports for the Superior Court. I also did worked at a day hospital program for 3 years for aggressive children. I developed the programs there. I also worked over 20 years for Social Security Disability, doing disability assessments. They involve psychiatric, psychological, memory, and concentration type of assessments. And I also work currently at a long-term care facility in which I'm a neuropsychologist. I provide direct care, and I also go out and interview prospective patients, like at Greystone and other places. I'm part of a team with a mental health director. I'm the chief psychologist on the mental health unit. There's two units there for mental health. One with really severely impaired individuals that have behavioral problems. Many of them have dementia. And then there's other people who have like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and I work with them too. And I also see other patients throughout the building.
Have you ever worked for DIFUS?
Yes, I have.
What did you do for them?
I did psychological assessments for DIFUS. For a time, I also worked for the PRU unit. That's the parents' attorneys. And then I also did some work for the guardian ad litem.
How about work for either police or correctional officers?
Actually, when I worked for the Rossi Group, I did psychological assessments on law enforcement. They were police, firemen, and I also did reports for private police departments. If a police officer was depressed or had some kind of difficulties, I made a recommendation either to allow them to have their weapon or have it taken away for a period of time. I also have done work for different prosecutors' offices and private attorneys. This last year, I did a report for Passaic County Prosecutor's Office on a Kroll case. I appeared in court about 3 times via video, and it was on a complicated Kroll case. In the last 2 years, I did approximately 9 private cases, including that one.
Did you ever do any psychology work in the Hudson County Jail?
Well, I was the administrator there. I was hired by a psychiatrist. I coordinated all treatment on the unit. I scheduled the psychiatric care, and as I said, I had my office right on the tier with the inmates.
During the span of your 30-year career, approximately how many evaluations have you done?
Many thousands of evaluations. So I would estimate anywhere between 8,000 and above.
And did most of those evaluations involve psychological testing?
Yes.
Have you ever testified as an expert?
Yes, I have in federal and state court, in New Jersey and out of state.
For both prosecutors' offices and defense?
Yes.
Judge, at this point, I offer Dr. Hasson as an expert in psychology.
Prosecutor, do you have any questions as to the qualifications of Dr. Hasson?
Not at this time, Judge. I'll ask him on cross-examination.
All right, and do you have any objection to the court qualifying him as an expert in the area of psychology?
No, Your Honor.
All right, based on the testimony of Dr. Hasson with regard to his education, his background, his work history, training, I do find that he's an expert in the area of psychology pursuant to Rule 702 of the New Jersey Rules of Evidence, and he will be permitted to render his opinion. I do find he does possess some specialized knowledge that will assist the trier, in fact, in making determinations necessary in this case. So qualified, go ahead, Mr. Belinkus.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Judge. Doctor, were you hired by the defense to do an evaluation of Michael Barrasso?
Yes.
And specifically, can you set forth what you were hired to do?
Well, broadly speaking, the goal was to assess his mental state at the time of the shooting on August 7th, 2019, but more specifically, to determine whether he suffered from a mental disorder as referenced in the diagnostic manual, which impaired his thinking to the extent that he could not appreciate his actions, and if he did know what his actions were, did not know what he was doing was wrong. He did not know the nature and quality of his actions.
Now, did you physically meet with Michael Barrasso?
Yes.
How many times?
I met with him 7 times.
And did you put the dates in your report as to when you met with him?
Yes.
Are there any mistakes with regard to the dates?
Yes. Yes, there are mistakes there. I met with
Can you
him,
explain when you met with him and for how long?
I met with him on October 29th, November 5, November 6, November 19, November 20, December 4, December 5, for a total of 37 3/4 hours.
In addition to meeting with Michael Barrasso for 37+ hours, did you interview anyone else?
I interviewed his former therapist, Dr. Picard, P-I-C-A-R-D. I misspelled it on my report.
All right, and how long did you interview her?
45 minutes. I also reviewed some notes she sent me, including text messages back and forth between Mr. Barisone and her over a period of time.
And why did you feel it necessary to interview Ms. Picardo?
Well, I wanted to find out whether he had any prior vulnerabilities that would influence the possibility of going from an earlier psychological vulnerability state into psychosis.
Now, why is that important to you with respect to your evaluation?
Well, there's a great deal of research that shows that many people in the general environment have what the pre-psychotic features. And if they're placed in a very stressful circumstance, they could convert into a psychotic situation. In his case, she said that while he appeared to be healthy, strong, and imposing, 6'3" or 6'4", she said he was a very vulnerable person, and that he suffered from long-term psychological problems, including depression, suicidal thoughts. She noted that there was a time when he was in Europe, I think 2015 or 2016, in which he spoke to her by telephone, stating that he had researched getting assisted suicide in Switzerland for $10,000, and she was able to talk him out of the suicide attempt, or not attempt, the actual suicide. But she said that basically he suffered from a lot of emotional instability. She praised him as having good features of his personality, but at the same time she gave a non-varnished opinion about him, saying, you know, he had good points and some difficulties.
Do you reference your interview with Picardo on page 9?
Yes.
What, if any, other information that was relevant to your evaluation did you obtain from Picardo?
She said basically that he was paranoid on the fringes. I'm sure she didn't know the actual term, but it would be pre-psychotic. He had features of an individual who could develop psychosis if he was placed under sufficient amount of stress.
And did she indicate anything with regards to his history as a child, small boy?
Well, he had a difficult childhood. He had a rough upbringing with his mother, who was emotionally abusive and also likely physically abusive, and he struggled. He made a successful life, but you know, he had a great deal of difficulties. He was also sexually assaulted as a child.
Now, what impact, if any, would those circumstances have on your evaluation of Michael Barrasso?
Well, individuals who tend to convert from pre-psychotic to a psychotic state have those features of having emotional instability, having a childhood history of abuse, and also being sexually assaulted. It would be a vulnerability that could magnify the effects of outside pressures.
Did Ms. Picardo indicate the length of time that she had treated Michael Barrasso on and off?
She treated him on and off for 20 years. She said approximately the last 2 years she hadn't treated him, but before that she treated him 6 years earlier for about 3 years straight.
Now, in addition to your clinical interviews of Michael Barrasso and your interview of Picardo, who was treating Michael Barrasso, did you do any psychological testing?
Yes, I did personality, cognitive, neuropsychological, but most important, I did validity testing. The validity testing looked at personality tests to see if they were valid, and also at cognitive assessments to see if they were valid, such as memory.
Okay. With regards to the MMPI-2, what is that?
The MMPI-2 is an objective personality test, true-false questions. And
How
it
many
had,
questions are
it's-
asked?
well, there's a total of 567, and true-false questions. I did the MMPI-2, I scored that. And basically it has 10 clinical scales. Each has a different name. So
What do those clinical scales measure?
they measure psychological problems, such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, mania, etc.
And do each of those components look at different aspects of someone's personality.
Yes, they do.
And again, so the jury understands, what are those 10 separate areas that are,
Well,
that-
the scales have different names, but scale 1 measures somatic complaints, physical complaints. Scale 2 measures depression. Scale 3 measures a concept called hysteria. Scale 4 measures psychopathic deviance. It sounds scary, but it could be made up of family and emotional problems. Scale 5 measures sex identification. Scale 6 measures paranoia. Scale 7, it's called psychasthenia, but it measures anxiety. Scale 8 measures thought disorder of schizophrenia, it's labeled. Scale 9 measures mania. The mean on the test, the middle score, is 50. If you go above 65, it's significant. Every 10 points above that is a standard deviation. And in this particular case, Mr. Barisone scored extremely high on scale 6. He had a T-score of 90.
and what is tail 6 again? I forgot.
Paranoia, I'm sorry.
And he scored what on that scale?
90.
And can you explain what a score like that means to someone like you in your profession?
It means that if we went in this whole building, there would probably be 0.001 people who scored as high as that. It's extremely rare. But the important part about that is that the validity scales did not show any feigning.
Okay,
He was-
now, you mentioned the word validity scales. Can you explain that so the jury can understand what you're talking about?
Every test should have validity to see whatever conclusions are made are accurate. If the test doesn't have good validity scales, it can come up with any statement. But on the MMPI, it's basically one of the gold standards in the United States and in the world for testing personality. He did not show feigning. He answered genuinely, honestly, and he had a very high score on paranoia. And then when I looked at the components of paranoia, persecutory ideas, it's called PA1, I believe the score was 105, if I'm not mistaken. That's even higher.
And what does that 90 score and that 105 score indicate to you as a psychologist with regards to Michael Barrasone's mental state?
Well, not just to me, any psychologist who did work on the MMPI would look at that to say that there's a very high likelihood of a delusional disorder, a psychosis, a break with reality.
Now, how did you score that test?
I ran it through a computer program made by Psychological Corporation. I gave it what they call extended scores.
And are there other ways to score that test
Yes.
other than using that
Well,
computer program?
You could hand score it, but it's best to do the computer scoring. Then I looked at additional scales on there. There's one program by Alexander Caldwell that is a ratio between neurotic and psychotic traits. He had a high score on that, an 88 score, that suggests that he's very prone to making idiosyncratic, unusual deductions about events in the real world that would fit in with being paranoid. There's information out there, and he combines it in a way that doesn't make sense.
And that's all data and scores that you got from the MMPI test?
Yes,
Anything
paranoid.
else- Anything else from that specific test?
Well, he had a high score on anxiety, ANX. He had a high score, another score on BIZ number 2 that shows bizarre, slightly bizarre thinking. There's different types of delusional disorder. He has a delusional disorder 2, not a 1. 1 would be in schizophrenia. His type of delusion is a non-bizarre type of delusion.
And what's the difference? Can you explain that to the jury? What
Okay.
type of delusion that test is pointing to?
Well, the test would pick up both. If he had a high score on scale 8, which is schizophrenia, and a high score on 6, it would suggest that he has some type of schizophrenia variation. It would be a type 1 delusional disorder. but he didn't have that. His type 2 delusional disorder, like the schizophrenia type, you cannot make sense of why the person's experiencing that. But on a type 1, there's some event in the environment that the person is experiencing and is giving it an odd type of spin. But there's something out there that could make sense to you. So if you're in your living room in your house and the people above you are making noise, on one hand you could say, well, it's the children frolicking around on the floor. On the other hand, you could say that someone has brought in some super machinery that is making the noise because they're trying to probe the people underneath, and get secret information. So there's a noise out there, but the way that the person interprets it is off.
Now, did you score Michael Barisone with regards to the Rorschach ink blot test?
Yes.
And can you explain that test to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
The Rorschach ink blot test was developed in 1921 by Herman Rorschach. It's 10 ink blots. Initially it was 41 ink blots, but the publisher didn't want to spend the money, so they just kept 10. And it was a game in Germany at the time that you would show the picture of an ink blot and ask the person what it is. In any event, I scored it according to one of the current systems, the Exner system, and basically came out showing that he is emotionally unstable. He has difficulty coping with stresses in the world around him. Part of the problem with his coping is he switches from overly emotional to an overly ideational or cognitive way of handling it, but he's not behaving consistently. So because he doesn't behave consistently, two things happen. The people in the environment can't figure him out, how he's going to behave. And also, because he's switching back and forth, he doesn't really work things out, to come to a conclusion.
Now, how is that Rorschach test scored?
Well, you measure where the person is shown an ink blot, and you say, what might this be? And then after that, you ask them where on the ink blot they saw it. Then you ask them, what about it made it look like a bat? So they may say, it's the form, it's dark ink or black or something like that. And you score that, the determinants. So you score the determinants for form, color, movement. And there's a whole bunch of other variables there, that you can score. So,
How reliable is that test, Doctor?
well, it's not like the MMPI. However, it's good in terms of explaining a person's way they see the world around them, their perception and their cognition. But it's not meant to find out if a person has a delusional disorder, because you could be the Unabomber, right, and come up with a very clean profile, because the person could say, well, I saw a bat over here, I saw this, that over there, but it doesn't really speak to the issue of the way he's thinking.
Is there any validity portion of that test to determine its accuracy?
Well, if you're going to do that test, you have to do it to a T. You just can't do it, partially. And the idea behind all of the testing is you do a whole host of testing to see if there's an overlap or agreement in the different tests. So you don't hang your hat on the MMPI alone, although that's a strong test. And you don't hang your hat on anything else, but to see if there's coherence. There was coherence between the Rorschach and these other tests that I did. The Rorschach indicated another quality of Mr. Michael was that he has a tendency to put together various pieces of information that are discombobulated and form it together to come up with an idea. It's over-inclusive thinking. And I found that when I spoke with him, and I also found that on other testings.
Now, other than the MMPI and the Rorschach, did you do any other psychological testing?
I gave another test called the PAI, Personality Assessment Inventory.
And what is that test?
That's a test similar to the MMPI, but it's different technically, and but it's a solid test. The Validity Scales were within normal limits. I used Rogers, there's a famous American psychologist who has done a lot of the work on malingering and deception. I used his cut scores for that test, and it was genuine, the way he responded. The sum and substance of that test was he was high on paranoid thinking, ideas of persecution, and he showed affective instability. The affective instability was picked up by a possible diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, but that's neither here nor there. The main point is that he had affective instability, where his emotions can be discombobulated kind of quickly under pressure.
Did you do any validity testing?
Well, it has validity testing on there. One is called the
Can you
NI.
explain to the jury what validity testing within a test deals with?
Validity testing can determine if an individual is manipulating his responses, whether he's overly reporting pathology or under pathology. It can tell that, right?
Can you give an example so the jury can understand?
Well, suppose like I'm trying to, there's no diagnosis of malinger, but suppose I'm trying to feign some
Fake.
fake.
What you're saying.
Fake. If I'm trying to fake something, that test could pick it up.
And how does it do that?
It has scales that have been, over the years, been determined to show that, right? So some scales can pick up whether a person is claiming excessive amount of positive characteristics that most of the people in the world will not claim. Like, I never lose my temper. There's other things that, there's other ways to do that. But the PAI, the MMPI, have the strongest validity scales.
Did you do any other validity testing?
Yes.
What?
I did a test called the SIRS 2, SIRS 2. It's a revamping of SIRS 1. What they wanted to do is to cut down on false positives. So if someone was, let's say, feigning amnesia or something like that, or feigning some psychiatric condition, they didn't want to have false positives. So what a false positive is, if you go into a jail, there's a magnetometer, and every time you go through it, if it rings, makes a buzz, because you have a back problem, you had surgery, metal in your back, that has high sensitivity, but it's not specific. You're not bringing in a gun or anything like that. So Rogers and his associates, when they developed it, they wanted to have a test that had strong specificity so that you wouldn't get false positives. On that particular test, Barisone did not show any feigning. He scored honestly.
Any other validity testing?
Well, there was two others. I did two other personality tests. I look at personality from a different perspective.
And why did you look at a personality test in evaluating Michael Barrasso?
Well, for the simple reason, if you're a forensic psychologist or psychiatrist or whoever it might be, you want to make sure that you're not being misled, having your own biases. You want to look at the person you're interacting with, and you don't want to be skewed in a certain direction. So I like to do a lot of testing to see if I'm missing something. So the tests have validity scales. I might say, well, someone is perfectly, well or not. And if the testing comes out in a different way, I have to scratch my head and look more deeply.
Did you do any personality tests? And if so, what specific tests did you do?
Well, as I mentioned, I did the MMPI, the Rorschach, the PAI. They all look at abnormal aspects of personality. But I wanted to compare it to other tests that look at normal personality.
And why did you want to look at that?
Because I wanted to check on my own views to see if I was accurate, to see if these other tests were accurate. That's called construct validity. I wanted to check it out.
And what does that mean? Explain that to the jury.
Well, there's a concept in psychology called multi-trait matrix. And what that means is you want to give multiple measures from different situations and to see if they all agree with each other, right? If there's agreement, you can say, well, you know what? That may be an accurate finding. And so it's a check. I do the testing as a check on myself and also a check on the tests. The two other tests that I gave measure normal traits. If you have an excess or a low amount of a certain trait, it can cause psychological problems. Those two tests agreed with the MMPI and the PAI and also the Rorschach. Basically, on the 16PF, it's developed on a factor analysis approach. But anyway, there were four elevations on the test, if I'm recalling, clearly. One was called Q4. It has a very high level of anxiety and depression. Another was a very low score on C. This test divides all of the scores in tenths. There's 10, 1, 2, 3, there's 10 of them. If you have a score of 1 or a score of 10, that's a very elevated score either way. Now, the score down on C was emotional instability. He had a score of 1, which is similar to the Rorschach and similar to the other tests, that he's unstable emotionally. He could be emotionally upset a little more easily than other people.
And did the tests that you've testified to so far all coincide with each other as far as the bottom line results that you
Yeah,
see?
they did.
And what does that tell you from a practitioner standpoint?
Emotionally unstable. Other tests indicate that he could easily be moved into a psychotic state. Psychotic state is just a break with reality. And some of the tests show that he has very idiosyncratic thinking. The Rorschach showed the over-inclusive thinking. It's a technical term, but all it simply means that if you meet with Michael Barisone and you're talking with him, it's really hard to do a clinical interview with him because he's all over the place. So anyway,
Now, did you do any cognitive tests?
yes, I did.
And again, why would you do a cognitive test in a psychiatric evaluation?
Because when I came in and I tried to interview him, and by the way, the reason I did it over 7 sessions was it's very hard for someone to play act over a long period of time. If you see someone who's play acting, there's a movement towards normality as time goes on because it's hard to keep up the act. There was no change with him. He was crying, sobbing. At one point, the officer who was outside, he called me over and said, "Are you okay?" Because he heard him like ranting and raving. He was very upset. And because of that, I suspected he had some kind of problem, neurologically or with attention or whatever it might be. So I decided to investigate that.
Okay, and is that why you did cognitive tests?
Yes.
What specific cognitive tests did you do?
Well, first, I gave a full IQ test because it could tell you if he has deficits in certain areas. The test is called the Wechsler Intelligence Scale, and there's a part on it that measures verbal abilities, nonverbal ability, working memory, where you could do 2 things at the same time, whistle and, play guitar. I'm being facetious. But it measures 2 cognitive things at the same time, psychomotor speed, and it also gives a full-scale IQ. I gave that. I found out that on that testing, he has a problem with working memory. It's a variation of attention. And then I also checked out his verbal IQ is up here, and his working memory is over here. It's 20 points lower,
And what does that tell you from a...
It's a relative deficit in working memory, attention.
And how does that relate to your evaluation
Well,
here?
And I also asked him about his childhood. He said that he always had trouble maintaining focus in school, right? But I noticed that when he'd be talking to me, he would be repeating himself constantly, as if like he couldn't remember what he just said. And then he'd be all over the place. And it was very hard to keep up with him. So the way I did it was I ignored any extra talk, and I wrote down phrase by phrase, and then when I came back to it, I said, well, you just said such and such, and I continued that way. It was a little bit more tedious, but I can get a comprehensive interview done with him. Now, because I saw that there was a problem with working memory and aspects of attention, so like, for example, if you say to him, give me digits forward, he could do pretty well on that, 5 or 7, between 5 and 7 digits forward. And then I said, do it backwards, like 2-4, he's supposed to say 4-2. He could only do 3. For someone who is as intelligent, he's an intelligent person, intelligent as him, it was a low score. So then I looked at attention, and I gave one test to check out attention, and his score
What
was
that test?
the CPT, the Connors Continuous Performance Test. And he scored so low on it, I was surprised. So I gave it to him 3 times. And he scored as if he was neurologically impaired with an intentional problem or, a diagnosis of ADHD. Then I didn't stand on that test alone, so I also gave another test called the ACT. It's auditory consonant test. So it's something like this. You say to the person 3 consonants, like I'm just making this up, A, B, C. And then you say 200, and the person has to count backwards by 3s. 200, 197, 194, 191, all the way back. Then you get to either 9 or 18 or 36 seconds, you say, what were the 3 words? And usually the person would say ABC. With Michael, he scored at the 1st and the 2nd percentile level. It was a low score. Then
What
also,
does that low score tell you?
he has an attentional problem. He's all over the place. He's like scattered. The scattered quality he has, I started picking up when I was talking with him. He'd be saying to me, wait a minute, I got to tell you this, I got to tell you that. And his thoughts were not linear. It wasn't like he was following, in a way that I could follow easily. It was difficult, to follow.
And
And,
what could cause someone to score or react like that?
well, it's hard to say 100% because he had a fracture of the skull when he was age 8. He also had 8 to 12 concussions, falling from a horse. Dr. Picardo mentioned to me that he also fell when he was roofing his house, and she said that he was too macho to want to go into the hospital. He used to do a lot of construction around his property. But it could be from the fall. It could be some other developmental problem, right? I don't know, but he has an attentional problem, and his thoughts are scattered.
Okay, and in reviewing the discovery, did you review the injury that Michael Barisone suffered in this incident?
Yes.
And what, if any, impact could they have had on his neuropsychological testing?
Well, he has no memory for the incident. And in my report, I noted a reputable neuropsychiatrist, Cummings, from California. He gave 2 examples. He said that Gene Tunney, who was a prize fighter who fought against Dempsey, he dropped out of boxing because he started having amnesia, periodic bouts of amnesia. And then the doctor gave an example of another prize fighter who was fighting a fight, and from the 4th round on, he didn't even know he won the fight until hours later he had to be told. So he was, to me, he looked like he lost the mixed martial art fight. He had severe bruising in his face. He had bleeding under the left ear, I think bleeding from the right eye, and he looked like he was given a workout. Now, it's possible that the beating, affected his memory. I can't say 100%, but it may have impaired what they call consolidation, but
Would his previous head injuries that you mentioned impact on a subsequent, have an impact on subsequent beatings?
yes, because if you're like a prize fighter and you get beaten a lot of times, let's say later in life you hit your head, it could have more of an impact than if it was the first time. The more prior blows to the head, especially in the front of the face or wherever you got hurt, it's going to have a greater impact than just one beating.
Now, did you test for executive functions?
Yes.
What are executive functions?
Well, the executive functions, I tried to look at it like differently. Executive functions are like organization, planning, things of that sort. He scored well on that. I also gave him a test among the executive functions that picks up if there's some form of brain damage, either acute or diffuse. He didn't have any problems with that. The only thing that I did notice in terms of executive functions, and I looked at it, is that he has some kind of nonverbal visual problem. And like if you ask him to draw a pattern, a complex pattern, he doesn't draw the outside. He draws like a little bit of it. It's as if he has trouble forming a visual picture of something. I don't know if that's and it's unusual. I don't know if that's from the head trauma or what, but people who tend to have some kind of executive dysfunction, sometimes when they try to do a task, they don't organize it. His was like all over the place in that regards.
Any other tests?
All right,
regarding
so
executive?
because he claimed that he had amnesia for the event, first of all, I also wanted to do validity testing. So the most important validity testing for cognitive is the VIP, and it showed no feigning on
Now,
either.
When you say validity testing, you administered a specific test to determine whether or not Michael Barisone was faking, not remembering the event.
I wanted to see, because people who are feigning, they typically try to claim all manner of memory impairment. They overplay their hand. He didn't do that. His memory was not terrible or anything of that sort. And on the VIP, it came out that he was honest and genuine, except I have to say this. On one part of the VIP, is a nonverbal part, it indicated there's a computer program on there that he had trouble maintaining his attention on the nonverbal part of the test. But even with that, it came out that he was conclusively genuine in how he responded. He showed effort and intent to do well on that test.
And what does that have to do with your opinion as to whether or not he's faking?
He wasn't feigning memory impairment, and if he's claiming that he can't remember, I tend to buy what he's saying, except that I don't know if it's from psychogenic. I put down it's a dissociative amnesia from stress, but it could be from the beating, it could be from the prior head injuries, or what.
So it could be either from a physical injury or from a mental
Yes,
injury.
and if I might interject, I just read a recent review article that it was from a university in Holland. That the program is like criminology there, and they studied 20 years of worldwide claims of dissociative disorder. They looked at the studies themselves, and the problem is that the people who did the studies, they didn't rule out TBI. A lot of the people had
What's TBI?
traumatic brain injury. They had mild traumatic brain injury, and they didn't rule that out as the reason the person couldn't remember. So in his case, I put down that he had an emotional type of loss of memory, but he also had, you have to keep in mind that he had a beating.
Did you do any memory tests?
Yes, I did, and
And why would you do a memory test when you were evaluating Michael Barrasone's state of mind at the time of the incident?
first of all, I wanted to see if he had some kind of significant brain damage that can influence the results. And like I just said, that people who are feigning amnesia or memory impairment, they tend to overplay their hand. So they have memory impairment all over the place. His actually was very specific in one little area, and that was nonverbal memory.
And were there any validity portions of those tests?
Well, the validity was the VIP. I also did another test called the CVLT, and I also did another test called the TOM. The CVLT is a list learning test, and it has a validity component built into it. The bottom line is that he was not feigning on that test. On the TOM, which is nonverbal memory, recognition memory, he had a poor score.
And what does that indicate to you?
I didn't know whether it was from the fact that he had problem with nonverbal memory or what. But, he was given 4 tests, 3 out of the 4 came out fine. The VIP is the most powerful one. of those different tests.
And how did he come out on that?
Fine. He was not feigning.
Did you do any perceptual tests?
I did.
Which ones?
Well, the tests that I gave were from the NAB, that's the Neuropsychological Assessment Battery. So you have a whole bunch of tests on that. Then I supplemented that with some other tests that I gave. I gave a test called the Ray Complex Figure Test. On that test, I saw that he worked very piecemeal in terms of putting things together. He also has a memory component on that. He scored poorly in terms of memory for nonverbal. His perceptual functioning was just borderline in a couple of tests. I don't know if, if I did more assessment with him, which I thought was like, I didn't see the utility of it, but, maybe I could determine exactly what the problem is with the nonverbal functioning.
And finally, did you do any tests with respect to language?
I did,
And why would you test or give him language tests?
because you have a beating to your front of your head, and this is like the frontal area of the skull. It could damage your verbal production. So if you say to an individual, I'm going to give you 60 seconds and tell me as many words that begin with the letter F-A-S, first with F. Don't give me people's names like Fernando. Don't give me places like France. Don't give me numbers like 5. And you total it up. There's tables that are based on age, education, ethnicity, and he scored very fine. Average score is between 12 to 15 words per minute, and he was like 18 per minute. So from the beating he had, it didn't affect that language production area.
Okay, now, you've testified to a great number of tests that you administered. Were the tests consistent with each other?
The tests were consistent in showing no feigning on personality or cognitive.
And what else did the tests indicate to you based on your scoring?
The tests indicate that he suffers from paranoia, delusional disorder of a very high level, and that it's very significant.
All right. Now, did you review Dr. Simmering's evaluation?
Yes, I did.
And did you review that stack of 91 pages that were provided to
Yes. I put down 51, but I don't know exactly what the number is for the simple reason I did count 91, but then I noticed in the pages themselves that there were duplicates. So I didn't actually count the clean pages. So I don't know if it's 51, 77, or 91. The total that I went through was 91, but there's duplicates in there.
Okay. Now, did you review any discovery that was provided by the prosecutor's office?
Yes, I went over the police reports, Morris County Department's reports, the hospital reports, the EMT reports, the emergency room reports, the orthopedic reports.
Did you review any social media posts?
Oh, yes. This was rough because there were like 6 boxes of Facebook posts, like over 20,000. I went through a number of them, but I didn't record all that I went through on my list. But there's one box for Mr. Goodwin. I think it's 2,000 or so items. I also went over text messaging back and forth between different parties.
Now, with regards to the social media posts, did you talk to Michael Barisone about various posts that he saw that Lauren Cataract had posted about him?
Yes.
And did you discuss any posts where she talked about going to war?
Yes.
And what, if any, impact did those posts have on Michael Barisone?
Well, he's calm right now, but when I was talking with him, he was like petrified. He was frightened when he read, and I read him the post to see what it was like, how he reacted. He was frightened.
did you go over a post where Cataract talked about weapons, guns?
Yes, I also saw pictures she had of,
And what specific effect did that have on Michael Barisone?
he was super frightened. He remained super frightened. On one of the times that I was there when I was leaving, he said to me that he wanted the judge, if he was freed.
Objection, Judge.
Don't say anything about the judge, I'll move on, Judge.
Okay.
That question's withdrawn.
In the discovery that you reviewed, did you discuss the fact that Lauren Cataract was tape recording Michael Barrasso?
Yes.
And did you discuss what impact that recording was having on his mental state?
He was incredibly frightened. He had no refuge, no place to go where he felt safe. And he was very upset. He said, this is an example of a terrorist, you know? And he was frightened, you know, a tremendous amount. And it upset him that she had a post that she referred to him and the other people there scurrying around, going into their car, you know, to speak to each other. But he was just very frightened.
What impact does someone thinking, whether it's true or not, that every word that you say is being listened to?
Judge, I'm going to object to the general nature of the question.
Yeah, I think it's a little broad.
Rephrase it.
Rephrase it, please.
What effect did Michael Barisone thinking that every word that he spoke to anyone was being recorded by someone that he was afraid of?
It made him super paranoid, that everything he was doing was being monitored. Not only being recorded, he thought that he was being filmed.
Did you review posts with him where Lauren Cataract was telling people on Facebook that Michael Barisone was threatening her life?
That super frightened him, because he has distorted thinking. So here's what his thinking was like. He said to me that the Parkland shooting person stated that he was bullied. Then he said, Cataract said, she's bullied. So then he said, my conclusion is she's going to kill me just like the Parkland shooter. That's how his deduction was off. But that's how we came up with that.
And did you discuss with him numerous contacts that he made with people who Cataract had previously posted things on Facebook about?
Yes,
For instance, the name Staggart and Parkinson.
I remember that.
Now, I don't want you to say what those posts contained, but did you discuss those posts with Michael Barrasso?
Yes.
And what did he say about those posts, and what was their effect on his mental state?
Well, the effect was it made him even more frightened. He saw how other people were treated, and he thought that there was a greater danger. And he actually admitted that to me. So I asked him about, like, you know, how things transpired to cause him all this difficulty. And he says, well, it was the pattern of everything that came his way. He looked up, he got information on Cataract, her behavior, and everything together made him more and more frightened. But he felt as if there was a realistic threat out there.
Now, did you discuss with him leaving his residence a week or so before the incident?
Yes.
And what did he indicate to you was the reason that he left?
He feared for his life.
Who was he living there with?
With Mary Haskins, and I think for a time her son.
And where did he go after he fled his residence?
He went to the, I don't know if it's the proper term, the recreation room at the stable. It was a large room that was furnished, that had a kitchen area there and place to sleep, and he moved in there.
Now,
A reception area, that's what it was called.
did Michael Barrasso, based on your discussions with him and the discovery that you reviewed, take any steps to try to protect himself?
He was frightened. He felt as if when he'd be talking to either Mary Haskins or someone else, that Cont'd was quoting directly what he was saying. And he got more and more scared, you know. And what he did was he hired someone to sweep the barn area and to see if they could find any of the tape recorders.
I'm going to show you D700-2. Did you review this in your discovery?
Yes, I did.
What is that?
This is a contract for debugging. It's, I think, $5,000, and of a certain area of the barn.
Did Michael Barrasso hire anyone else?
Well, he hired a person to watch overnight and to sit in his SUV,
And why did he hire that person?
because he was fearful, because he was saying that Lauren Cont'd and Rob Goodwin, they'd be wandering around at night, in the middle of the night, and he was fearful that they were going to do something.
Do what?
Burn the barn down, harm people. And when he stayed at the reception area, he made sure that all the windows and doors were locked.
Did he do anything else to protect himself? Did he hire a private?
Oh, yes. He hired a private investigator to find out if they had a prior arrest record, and that upset him too, because he saw.
We cannot go into
Okay.
the specifics, but 700A-1, is this the background check that you talked to Michael Barrasso about?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what impact Michael Barrasso getting this document from the private investigator had on his mental state?
It intensified the fear factor. He felt as if that there was a whole bunch of information that was pointing in the direction that these are dangerous people.
Did Michael Barrasso ever call the police?
Yes, he did.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 4 times.
And did you discuss those specific instances with him?
Yes, I did.
And what did he indicate to you with regards to each and every one of those instances?
Total frustration. He was trying to say how scared he was. He felt as if they were poo-pooing it, and he had no place to turn. That's how he felt. He had no recourse.
And what did that do to his psychic?
He felt alone. He felt vulnerable. He felt as if he felt as if he couldn't fight back, so to speak.
And at some point, was he told that the Morris County Prosecutor's Office was consulted?
Yes.
And did anything happen with regards to them consulting about this incident,
They
based
rev-
on your review of the discovery?
The AP reviewed the information that Michael found upsetting, and they didn't find it of sufficient type to follow through with any kind of action. They basically told him that it was a landlord-tenant difficulty.
And when Michael Barisone heard that, both from the police and the prosecutor's office, what effect did it have on him?
Felt more vulnerable. He had no protection.
Now, did Michael Barisone talk to you about his knowledge of Goodwin and Canarak's drug use?
Yes,
I'm not going to ask you specifics, but did that play any role in Michael Barisone's mental state with regards to your evaluation?
yes. He felt
And
both.
how so?
He felt both of them were unstable to begin with, and he thought with the drug use that they're even more unstable. And then, if I recall correctly, he spoke to someone who thought that drugs might be planted on his vehicle, and he got even more scared.
And in addition to that information, did you talk to Michael Barisone about Lauren Canarak posting things on social media indicating that she had mental or psychological problems?
Yes,
Did you discuss that with Michael?
I did.
And what impact did that have on his mental state?
Everything was drip, drip, drip of making him more frightened. And he particularly was frightened when she essentially said that she had multiple personalities and she could not be responsible. Then he combined that with images he saw of her, where there were gun images, statements that she made about shooting at people who tried to...
Objection, Judge.
Okay.
All right, sustained, Mr. Belinkus, as previously discussed.
Now, did Michael Barisone talk to you about an incident where Robert Goodwin made some gesture with his finger?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What specifically did he tell you about that?
He said on August 6th, when the people from Washington Township came to his place, there was like 3 different people, a number of cars. They came up. He said Rob Goodwin was 15 feet away, and he placed his hand in the form of a gun to his head and said words to the effect, watch out, or something like that. And he smiled on his face. And
What did Michael Barisone say about that smile to you?
he said it scared him because he remembered something that happened a long time ago when he was a little boy. He was sexually assaulted by someone. And he says, oh, I saw the same kind of eyes, the frightening eyes. They scared him. The same thing when he had trouble with his mother when she burnt his hand. It was the same kind of eyes. And it made him frightened. It was just fearful of them.
Now, did you review the police reports with regards to the day of the incident?
Yes,
And did you review the reports regarding DCPP's contact with Mary Haskins and Michael Barisone?
yes.
Now, what did Michael Barisone tell you with regards to what he heard during that meeting with DCPP?
The only thing I thought he said that he heard the word of sexual abuse and that he was worried that the family would be broken up, the children taken away. And he had a distorted view that if the children were taken, if he and Mary Haskins were arrested, his biggest fear, this is completely delusional, his biggest fear, I think, is delusional. His biggest fear was that Lauren Canarak and Rob Goodwin would kill the children. And he linked it up with seeing some posts where they were trying to get information on the 2 children. But he was frightened.
Judge, objection. There's no evidence of that.
See outside more. See you in about 15 minutes. You can step down, Doctor.
Okay.